Hi, everybody. Welcome to the basics of consulting for archives and museums. If you are new to our webinars, I am the founder and director of Relicura. I have 15 years of experience in museums, archives, and cultural heritage organizations. And I am the business owner, consultant, author, speaker, and people first advocate. Disclaimer, I am a museum and archives specialist. I am not a lawyer, tax specialist, accountant, or business coach, but I am the owner of a successful business and I do have experiences that I can share that could be helpful to you in your journey. We're going to cover, first of all, an overall definition of consulting, so we're working from the same understanding. We'll get into how to get started, so very basic business fundamentals. We will then dive into how to determine your services, and then, of course, the all-important how to calculate your rate. I will then wrap us up with how do you find work, things to consider, tools and resources that I use that I recommend if you start your own business, and then what it takes to make it. So first of all, what is consulting? And we're going to define consulting and how it differs from contracting. I often hear these two concepts conflated from people who are not already a consultant or contractor. So I do want to be very specific in our definitions because there is different business expense and tax implications potentially if you're a contractor versus consultant, as well as different risks that are associated, opportunities, etc. So for consulting, if you are a consultant, you are a subject matter expert and you are being sought out and compensated for your insight, your advice, your recommendations. It's usually a much higher level strategy, people paying you for your intellectual prowess versus you actually doing a thing. Like, for example, you are not being hired as a consultant to process a collection. That's a contractor. Next for a consultant is that you can work on both short-term and long-term projects. So short-term could be for some of our projects, if we're doing a policy consultation, it can be as quick as 6 weeks. For other clients where we're doing some massive work, especially with digital collections, it can be 2 to 3 years. Also, as a consultant, you are running a consulting business. It is not just you yourself as a worker bee. So you'll have those business costs that go above and beyond you just being self-employed. As a contractor, you are a professional, but you're brought in to provide staff type activities. So things like processing a collection, cataloging, digitization. These are all activities that require a professional, but they don't require a subject matter expert. And as such, you're usually paid just 2/3 the rate of what a consulting rate would be. Next, for contractor, is that you work primarily on those longer term projects. So the things we covered as examples, processing a collection, digitizing, cataloging, those are all usually long term, year to 2 year type projects for a contractor. And you are not running a business per se. There may be some like sole proprietorship, like you need a city license, for example. So there might be like a little $15 fee, depending on where you are, for you to be a contractor as a self-employed person, but you are not going to have nearly the amount of overhead costs, let alone business license, etc. costs as you would if you're running a full-blown business as a consultant. So some seemingly small but very significant differences in terms of whether you want to be a consultant and run a business and create and then run a business, or if you want to be a contractor who's more a person for hire, whatever the project is. Also, usually as a contractor, I should mention, usually only have like 1 or 2 projects at a time, whereas a consultant is balancing many different types of client projects. It's a full-blown business. You may have a team that can then act as contractors. So There's quite a bit of difference once you get into the details of what each mean, the structure in place, the rates that are charged as a result of expenses incurred, all of that. So as you go through this webinar with me, I know you came into this thinking you wanted to be a consultant, but do have a think about whether you actually meant you want to be a contractor. The benefits of being a consultant is that you are the expert. That can seem intimidating to some people. That is something that my brain thrives on. So I am perfectly fine being the expert and having people respect and listen to me as an expert. Also, you choose who you work with and how. And this is such an empowering aspect of being a consultant. And it is one of the biggest benefits, I think, to my mental health specifically is having the power to choose that. Also, you decide what you put up with. So if you have a client that is misbehaving, not respecting your time, etc., you can fire them. You can not work with them again. You can turn in project as is and sever ties. So you decide what it is that you want to put up with. Also, you get to decide what you want to work on. To some extent, if you need income, you're running a little low, yes, you may decide to take a project that's not entirely exciting to you, but overall, you get to choose what you want to work on. You also get to decide how much you want to work and when. You don't necessarily need to work a full time. Perhaps you just want part time. Perhaps you want more than full time. And you get to decide when. It doesn't have to be Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And then you decide where you work and how. Especially with the pandemic, so many of our clients are actually out and beyond the Pacific Northwest region because it just, quite frankly, doesn't matter to a lot of the work that we do as consultants, not contractors, that allows us to do quite a bit of it remotely. Now, there are challenges to being a consultant. First of all, it is all on you. Anything that comes up, it's you. You have to figure out how to start and run a business. If you, like myself, were never somebody who grew up with knowing another business owner to be able to model or emulate. Also, I was a history major, so I had like 0 business classes in my education. Also, you're the one responsible for covering your own benefits. So if you are a person who is being self-employed, in this case, whether a consultant or contractor, and you don't have a partner that can cover you for like health benefits, that means you are on your own. The job is not going to provide you health benefits. You need to provide them. You're the one responsible for bringing work in. If you are not doing the work, going out and going after projects, bidding for projects, etc., then it's going to be very hard for work to come in for you. You're also the responsible person for doing the work, especially if you don't have a team, which when you're just starting out, that's usually the case. So it's all on you to get it done. And if you don't do the work, you don't get paid. So if you happen to get sick, if you go on vacation, if you need to take time off, if you're not working during that time, then you don't get paid. So there are things that you have to keep in mind in structure because you're the one responsible for figuring that out. And then you're the one held responsible if scopes aren't met. So for many of the projects, there will be a scope of work. You sign an agreement, these deliverables for this compensation. If you are not bringing the deliverables in the way agreed to by both parties, then you're not going to get paid, and that is on you. How to get started. So the very first thing typically that you'll need to do is choose an entity type. And I am using entity type the way that businesses and like the IRS office uses entity type. And depending on what type you are, will dictate to some extent the taxes that you will be responsible for paying. It will impact typically the amount of liability and whether it is you personally taking that liability or the business. It can impact and inform the different costs of what it takes to run a business, depending on what type you are. And it can impact perception. For example, with perception, I started out the business as a sole proprietorship. We'll get into what that means in just a moment. And that's like you're a baby business, you're just starting out, you're testing the waters. And then I moved after a year to an LLC, so limited liability corporation. And that change, while not really changing anything else about the business, it gave it an era of being more professional. So it gave it a bit of business gloss. So that is what I mean by perception in terms of, are you a business? Are you an LLC? Or are you somebody who's sort of freelancing, testing it out as a sole prop? So, entity types, sole proprietorship or sole prop, as you will hear almost everywhere else, is you as a person. You can use your social security number, you can go get a business tax ID if you want, but really what this means is that it's on you. So, any liability, it's on you. Any taxes that need to be paid, it's on you as being self employed. It has the lowest cost though as a sole proprietorship, so it can be very appealing for those just starting out and not sure if how much they want to commit to the business building idea. And so for budgetary as well as like all the legal and tax hoop jumping, it makes sense to start out as a sole prop for many people. Next, you can move into single or multi-member limited liability company. And single member is what I am. We move from sole prop to single member LLC, which means there's just one of me versus like a partnership. And the limited liability piece means just that. It's that the liability of whatever happens with or to the business is that it stays with that business versus impacting you or your partner and your personal financial assets. Next up is C corporation, typical corporation stuff. For many of us, we will usually not reach this level or want to be in this level. More likely is becoming an S Corp or an S corporation. And I'll get into some of the nuances of what that looks like from my own business journey. But S Corp can be something that's appealing once you reach a certain level. You can get some trade off in the different tax liability area. From a risk liability perspective, you're still protected as an LLC, but filing as an S Corp. So there's some fun, like depending on the income and your business situation, and this is where a tax accountant comes in handy. It may be more beneficial for you to be one versus the other as your business grows. But for the majority of you, if you're just starting out, it's usually going to be sole prop, maybe LLC if you're worried about the liability, but that's where you're going to start and be at probably for a little bit. You'll need to consider state and city licenses, and every state and city are different. For the most part, when you start at the state level, you'll need to register with the Secretary of State. That means registering your business name if you have one, or yourself, receiving a registry number from that state. And then for your city, at least in the state of Oregon, you have to get a business license in whichever city you live in. And some cities, even if you don't live in that city, but you do business in that city, you have to get a city license with them too. For example, I have a city license for the city that I live in and where the business is based, but I also work with a client out in Astoria, a different city, and so I also have a City of Astoria license. So that's why I mentioned there could be several, and you will discover that as you acquire clients in different cities. Questions. So we did have quite a few questions for this webinar come in, and so I've got them sprinkled throughout, so it's not just like towards the end. So we'll approach and cover these questions as they are topically appropriate in this webinar. First one, is it cost prohibitive to start a new LLC in our field without having a client base established? So first of all, I don't know if my definition of cost prohibitive is the same as your definition of cost prohibitive. And I also wonder if instead of cost prohibitive, you may also mean risk, financial, more than financial. So it depends. But From my experience, no, it's not cost prohibitive, especially if you're starting out as a sole prop, you're doing some very basic business stuff. It doesn't actually take a lot of finances to get that piece started. Um, However, it is always easier if you have clients in the area already established. So it's really up to you in terms of what is that bottom line in terms of being cost prohibitive. How long are you able to wait and try to acquire clients before whatever risk threshold you've established is met? It also depends on where you are located and how many, like the density of museums and cultural heritage organizations in your area. And it will depend on the services you offer, if you can do them remotely with clients further away, and what your overall business strategy is. So, my short answer is no, it's not cost prohibitive, but it's really going to depend on what your limitations that you're working within are and how much your risk tolerance is for you investing in this particular venture. Determining your services. So, what can you offer? I want to first of all start off with saying that the kitchen sink strategy is not a business strategy. This is so tempting for so many of us to do. And I honestly fell foul of this when I first started was I can do anything. If somebody needs something, great, pay me, I'll do it. But it really made it hard to actually communicate to people what it was that I did. It also made it really hard for me to focus in my specialty areas, areas that I, one, really enjoyed working in, and two, that I was an expert in, and so able to charge more for. So, for so many reasons that could probably be their own webinar, is you can't just do everything. You really need to hone it in. And I'm going to say no more than three services to start with. So start narrowing it down. And part of that is determining what you are an expert in. For example, and again, a difference of whether you're a consultant or a contractor, like you are not going to say that you are an expert in processing a collection because that's you as a contractor. That's not you as an expert as a consultant. So you want to think about larger concepts of our field and that you have with education and experience in. For example, one of the major service areas that we provide with clients is digital collections management. And that as a concept could encompass many different types of things within each of our projects that we work on. But that is what I am an expert in. Then figure out how you can apply that expertise to any organization you work with. So it's not enough for you to say, oh, I am an expert because I did this one thing at this one organization. You need to be able to take that and replicate it or be able to apply it to different situations, different organization types, different collections. Otherwise, you don't have a service that is replicable that you can take and adapt to any client situation you find yourself in. You should also perform a market evaluation. So after you've had a think and a narrowing down of what your specialty services are, you should do a research of requests for proposals or RFPs to see what sort of work is being advertised and is available. Join listservs for professional organizations or for geographic areas. For example, like Portland area archivists is one of the listservs I'm on. And pay attention for the calls that make it out through those listservs, because while some of them can be calls for applications for new employees, other calls can be for contractors or consultants. Then finally, evaluate who else is in your space, who's offering similar areas of specialty. What are they offering? How are they offering it? How do they speak about it? And get a sense of, okay, how can I differentiate myself from that person? Is there competition there? Is there actually areas for like affinity or collaboration? There is so much ways we can specialize and frame our work and our approaches that I do believe there's room for quite a few of us, but it is important to make sure that you're doing that market evaluation, because that's what good business people do, so that you know your position in that market and how to best articulate and offer your services. While doing that, doing the homework, I want you to think about what is it that you actually love doing, because when you're growing your business, as you're offering these services, because you're going to be specializing, you'll be doing these types of services and similar type projects dozens and dozens of times, hopefully, if your business is successful. So that means you really need to love what it is that you're doing. Also, if you do love what you're doing, if you are passionate about it, it is contagious. People can tell that you love it. It's easier to talk about, it's easier to market yourself. You feel more comfortable in the subject matter, so you have more confidence. For so many reasons, the services you offer, while you need to be an expert in, you should also really love it. Calculating your rate. So we're going to start off with the concept of the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule, and then we'll get into the nuances and all of the nitty-gritty details that you actually need to have. So 1/3 rule means taking whatever it is that your rate is for the hour, dividing that total rate into thirds. And 1/3 is supposed to cover the cost of your time, your service, so it's your compensation. The second 1/3 is supposed to be your expenses, so whatever the business expenses are, and that is including taxes you need to pay, which is going to be both employer and employee taxes. And the final third is to help cover anything that is non-billable time. So all of the time it's taking to set up your business, the time it takes to go and get professional development, in it, like applying for work through RFPs, none of that can be billed to a client, but you still need to account for that time. And so that makes up that last 1/3. What you will notice is that this does not go into any of the specifics or nuances of benefits unless you're covering that under expenses, though if you encompass all of the benefits that I think you should have, I think that's going to be more than 1/3. Also, it does not cover the concept of profits or profitability. So while this is a great concept to start out with, I do want you to be aware of the details of the finances you need to consider beyond this. So to get more specific into the calculation of your rate, I want you to think about the following equation. Taking your hourly rate if you were traditionally employed, add into that the expenses. If you're not sure what those look like yet, do a multiplication of what that hourly rate is. Think about the administration time in terms of all of that non-billable work, and then also include specifically the tax rate that you need to pay based on your circumstances, and factor in that there's both the employer and the employee taxes that you have to cover as a self-employed person. A popular tip around that is to take the hourly rate at a traditional job and multiply it by 3 to get a consultant's hourly rate. And so you'll notice that that popular tip is basically being modeled after the 1/3 rule. But it's a great place to at least get started, especially if you're not quite sure what the expenses look like, if you're not quite sure if you're factoring in all of the taxes correctly, if you are not aware or sure of how much time out of a 40-hour work week is actually going to be spent on non-billable work, it's a great place to start. To find that hourly rate, that if you were to be traditionally employed, there are a few different sources that you can get that from. My favorite one, especially since you are considering this from a consulting perspective, is to go and take a look at the GSA, which is, I think, General Schedules Administration. It's a federal department that handles all of the different federal buying of services and products. So it's very standardized. And one of the vendors, History Associates, has publicly available, because it is federal contracts, schedule for the different positions that they offer as contractors in this case, and expertise consultants. They have those position descriptions, and then they provide an hourly rate. So not only do you get to inform, like, are you doing the math right, but you get to check to see what one of your competitors potentially is charging. So uh, this source is good for a couple of reasons. Check out for in gathering data, and if you attended the How Much Am I Worth webinar, like, it's very similar, most of the same sources, because it's really about trying to find, like, if you were traditionally employed at the rate of your expertise and experience, you can then do all of the other math around that. So taking a look at the MIT Living Wage Calculator, because where you live does impact your overall expenses as well as market rate. The Consumer Price Index, especially after this last year of inflation. Checking firms with federal contracts, so like the GSA with History Associates. Also, government pay schedules at state and federal levels. You can find what the government rate is for a particular position description. You can do market evaluations through job boards. You can check the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the dozens of salary surveys that we have in our various fields. And if you were recently traditionally employed, you can take your current or recently past hourly rate based on that position description or classification, and or compare that to those of peers. So there are quite a few different resources where you can get that hourly rate number and then manipulate it depending on, like, I need to add more, like, it's more expensive for my cost of living over here, so I need to account for that. So just know that there are tons of places where you can get this info to start working with that equation of what is your hourly rate. And here is just a snippet of the History Associates schedule of rates. So you can see their bottom line for project support. That's the lowest hourly rate they have. And then as you move your way up to more experience, more responsibility, more into that expertise consulting role, you see that the hourly rate is almost $184. That link is to the PDF of the entire schedule where they have their position descriptions. So definitely check that out if that is helpful for you. But just one great example of many different sources that you can consult. Webinars, the Ask Me Anything Career Edition, I get into some of the consulting hourly rate examples, and then the How Much Am I Worth most recent Summer 2022 edition goes into much more depth on each of those resources. So if you've not seen that webinar yet and you want more detail around this, please go check out that webinar. It literally takes an entire hour's worth of webinar to cover all of those sources and to do the further calculations. So if you need help around there, go check it out. All right, getting into expenses. If you are new to business, it can be very difficult to be like, well, what are all of the expenses? First of all, any sort of licensure. When you're just starting out, and if you are a sole prop, it's usually fairly minimal. Like, I think my Oregon registration was 100, and I think my city of Tigard, when I first started, I think it may have been like $30. So very affordable. As that increases or as your entity type changes, it gets more expensive. Taxes, depending on how much you are bringing in, what your expenses are, what entity type you are, will determine how much taxes you pay. Also, if you need insurance, and we'll get into the concept of insurance a little later on in the presentation, you'll need to factor in hardware and software. For us, and at least for our business at Relicura, it's like literally desktop, laptop, software to run it. That's about it. Then, as you are running a business, and as we'll talk about in the resources section, you will eventually and should have a lawyer, first of all, to put together your contract or agreement for clients, also to put together non-disclosure agreements, because those will come in handy. Also, as I found out in just my second or third year, having a lawyer to help with copyright and to send cease and desist letters to plagiarists. And all of the other fun things that having a lawyer would be like, have them protect you and your business and have them go deal with the bullshit stuff. Also, an accountant, while you may not need like the day to day bookkeeper type accountant, I highly recommend getting a tax accountant for those annual taxes to make sure that you're doing it right and not rudely surprised. You'll have to factor in professional conferences, not only for your professional development, but that's also like a major networking, see and be seen sort of scenario. So you do want to attend those. Any sort of business development for yourself, especially if you're like me and have absolutely zero business background before this. And if you need any other sort of contractors, whether that is you subcontracting as part of a project, or if you need a contractor for like website design, for example. Taxes. So this first scenario was how I started out as a sole proprietor and moving into single member LLC. So needed to cover both the employer and the employee tax as a self-employed person. And because of where I live, the state tax rate, as well as my partner who also earns an income, my taxable rate when I was both a sole prop and a single member LLC was 46%. So anything that I brought into the business was taxed at 46% because it's basically saying, well, you were one person, you earned all of that money, therefore all of that money is taxed at 46%. That's minus expenses, but basically that's it. It's a very high tax rate, and that is why you need to be so aware of how much you have to pay on what you bring in so that you can bring in enough money to where it actually makes sense for you to do the work. I have seen so many people not charge enough and get totally screwed on the taxes piece to the point where like they're barely making, if you accounted for all of that, they barely made minimum wage, which is not the point, especially you as a consulting expert. So, moving from single member LLC and then filing as an S Corp. And so there's a whole bunch of like, go talk to a tax accountant as to why that makes sense. But Relicura is a single member LLC still, but we are now filing taxes with the IRS as an S Corp. I'll get into why that switched in a minute, but that means that we are paying the same employer employee taxes, but we're also adding on, in this case, some fun state taxes for both Oregon workers' compensation, but also paid family and medical leave. We've always had the TriMet excise tax, so at least that's not new. So we have some increase in taxes, but we also had some benefit in trade-off. So I'll get into that in a moment. So when you are filing as an S Corp, even while still being a single member LLC, that means the taxes that you pay on earnings is just my earnings. It is no longer you are one person and everything you bring in is taxed at the 46% like it was. It is now you are an S Corp. It is not just you. And what you are bringing in as an individual, what you're being paid, will tax that. So it lessened the amount of total pot available to be taxed. So that is some of the savings, even though we've increased costs or payments in other areas. And there's a threshold you have to meet for that math to actually make sense. And my tax accountant advised that the threshold in order for us to make that switch mathematically for it to make sense for us was that the business had to bring in more than 100,000 for the year, and it had to be more than just me. I had to have at least one more employee in order for all of the different tax situations and costs to make sense. So while the S Corp is very appealing and it means that not quite as much of your money that you bring in is taxed, there are other expenses and trade-offs to be aware of. So just be aware of that and work with a professional. We now need to consider if we're doing an hourly or value-based rate. Regardless of where you land on this one, I still recommend that you calculate your hourly rate because that is so important to understanding the cost of your time and how that helps to inform your value. Uh, but once you reach a certain point in your business, it makes sense for you to shift from charging hourly to charging for value, because the more you do something, the more you get systems built, the faster and more efficient you're going to be at doing those things, at least for a good majority of what we work on. And so, as you get better at doing those things, as you build those systems and build in efficiencies, that means it's going to take less time for you to do those things. And then the math works out where you make less money doing the things that you're better at doing. And that is not the point of why we're doing this. So you need to eventually move from hourly to value based, because while it may take you less time, the value of your time has actually gone up. That is a concept difficult to explain to most people who are not running their own businesses. So please don't even bother trying to explain that to the nonprofits or organizations you're working with. All they need to know is if you're doing hourly rate, what is that? Or they are contracting you to do X service. That service is valued at X dollars, no hourly. But remember that as you are moving towards value based, it does need to be informed by how many hours it takes you to do it and how many hours it may take just like anyone else to do it, to help you get a gauge of what is this service valued at. It takes practice. It takes you getting familiar with what it is you do, how long it takes you. So value based is not something you can probably execute right away, but it is a goal to move towards. And remember, you are an expert. You remember you're a consultant, and that's the definition. You are the expert in your field, and your services are unique. So you need to price accordingly. Pricing a project. So whilst you figure out all of the hourly and the hourly versus value, you also have to determine what is the shape of the proposed project, what are the activities that are involved in that scope of work, how long does it take to do all of those activities, what are the value of those activities, are there any non-direct project costs or activities involved, for example, setting up calendar appointments, answering emails related to the project, and then overall value of the service you're providing or the product you're producing. So you need to figure out, like, A to Z, what is this project going to take? Have I accounted for everything specific to the project? Have I accounted for everything that's not necessarily obvious, but yet is administratively critical to doing the project? And therefore, how much of my time and how much value am I providing based on the shape of this project? Question: how do you determine what work can be defined as chargeable versus what is not? And so all of it is chargeable because all of it has a cost. Your direct time with the client, easy. Obviously, it's a cost. You are going to account for that time and that activity in your charges. However, everything else is also chargeable because it has a cost of your time. So emails, anything that is to support the project or the client, but yet not directly, like you writing the report, for example, all of that needs to be logged and included as part of your work on that project. And then, as you remember, we talked about all of that non-billable hour cost that needs to be accounted for and included in your hourly rate, bringing us back to the answer of all of it has a cost, all of it is chargeable. Finding work. First of all, the concept of marketing. So unless your business is very drastically different from the majority of museum and archive consulting businesses, you're not going to do things like Facebook ads, Instagram, whatever's, etc. This is not an influencer kind of field. And doing that kind of social media marketing makes zero sense. But you do want to focus on getting in front of the people who matter in like your field. All the people in our field matter. We want to get in front of them. We don't want to get in front of general population people. That makes zero sense. So where are the people in our field? They are at professional organizations, many of which offer consulting directories now. When I first started, that's where I got the majority of my clients, was from the directories of the different professional organizations I'm a member of. Sponsoring conferences, it costs money, but it also goes to support a great educational cause. And if you're the one that's helping to sponsor food, you are definitely going to be at least name checked, if not fondly remembered at those conferences. Professional networking, I know a lot of us aren't super huge or comfortable into networking, but it is so important as you build relationships, because so much of our work is usually referral work. Professional service is another great way to get your name out there or your business name out there by providing professional service, joining a committee, helping to host a conference, things like that. And then thought leadership. This is maybe as close as we get to the influencing stuff, but it's providing valuable information, educational resources, general support of the field in a way that is the most comfortable and effective for you. So for me, and during the pandemic, I found my way to webinars, and not only do I enjoy them, which is why I'm still doing them, but you also appear to enjoy them, as evidenced by the hundreds of people that attend each of them that we do. So thought leadership could be hosting a webinar, sharing your resources, not charging people for it. It can be contributing articles, presenting at conferences, being a leader in a specific area, preferably your subject of expertise. So give that some thought as well. Finding work continued. So yes, professional organizations, they have consultant directories, use them. They also have listservs, which is where a lot of the people who are searching for both consultants and contractors will post their needs. So pay attention to that. Also, at a city, state, and federal level, there are going to be requests for quote, RFQ, or requests for proposal, RFPs, where the city, state, or federal organization is looking for a specific service or product. And so tapping into those areas, while it can be a bit of sifting through and learning how to use their very awful faceted searching, you can sometimes find projects that are a great fit for you in your area, or maybe even not in your area, that you can go and bid for. And quite honestly, the truth is, when you're trying to find work and you're just starting out, is that it takes time, as with any business. And especially in this field, your most prolific and quality source for work is your past clients, as either repeat clients or as referral network. So you work with somebody last summer, they then refer you to their other 3 local organizations that you really need to work with this person. We get now so much of our work after almost 6 years of being running the business, quite a bit of our work, probably 90% in some quarters, is either past clients coming back for additional work, or clients that have made their way to us because they were referred by past clients. So as you can see, that takes time. Things to consider. What is your risk tolerance? Starting any kind of business is going to have an inherent risk. Starting a business and not being profitable is a potential risk. Starting a business and not being able to afford benefits has a risk. Starting a business and not being successful and causing liability to yourself or your partner is a risk. There is quite a bit that it can be overwhelming enough to cause many people not to pursue it. And so it really just depends on how comfortable you are with risk and how much risk there is for you in your particular situation. Another thing to think about is, what is your comfort level with putting yourself out there? For most of our field, we're in our field because we love the work. We're not necessarily a bunch of extroverts. And when you're running your own business, you have to put yourself out there constantly. You have to put yourself out there when you are looking for work or bidding for work. You have to put yourself out there when you are doing the work because you are the expert. You have to show up as an expert. So, how comfortable are you in doing that, both for your business, but also for your clients? What is your comfort level with being the expert? For me, this wasn't a huge challenge. For other people, this can be a major mental blocker if you have not thought of yourself as an expert before, or if you had not considered yourself being really good at these particular things, or your experience actually means that you have quite a bit of great experience in this area. So you have to really consider, in addition to putting yourself out there, how comfortable are you with being like the point person, the expert, the one making the call, both as a consultant, but also to run your business. Another question to consider is, do you have the ability to travel? Because of the nature of our work, while some of it can be done locally, and we do have local clients that we love, also the majority, at least for our business, the majority of our clients are not in our state. And so there's quite a bit of remote work, but also travel to clients on site that are out of state. So thinking about your particular family situation, thinking about your enjoyment or ability to travel, whether or not that is something you are interested in and can support or not. Do you need insurance? So, getting into the insurance question, for us, the main ones are going to be general liability insurance, professional liability insurance, which I've also seen called errors and omissions. And if you have actual employees, you will be required to have workers' compensation insurance. So, thinking about insurance, when does that make sense? How much insurance do you need in those areas? And at what point does that make sense for your business? And so I think I have a question coming up here. What type of insurance coverage did you choose to go with, and has it changed as you've grown as a business? Yes to the second question. So when the business started and it was just me, I think the first year I did not have insurance, and for most, actually all of my contracts actually did not require insurance. But it got to a certain point fairly quickly, like year 2, year 3, as I acquired city and state contracts, as I acquired contracts that were 25,000 or above, as I started working on fairly important data sensitivity, etc., um, the the sooner and the more important the requirement of insurance was in order for me to even sign contracts and perform that work. So I very quickly acquired the general liability and professional liability, so those first two. And then the workers' compensation came year 4 or 5-ish, once we started getting employees and we started restructuring the business to be more than just me. So that's when worker compensation insurance became required. So sometimes the very work that you're doing or the contracts you bring in demand it, and so you need to go get it when it's demanded or not do that work. So it will be dictated by the work that you do, whether or not you get it. I would say it's probably a good idea in general, once you start doing quite a bit of work, to get that general liability insurance, but it's a balance for you in terms of, again, like, what is your risk tolerance? What are the requirements of your contracts? What is the type of work that you're doing? Who you're doing it for, etc. Should you get certifications? I have seen this question quite a bit over the years on different social media accounts for museums and archives. I have colleagues who are brilliant and they love certifications, and they have half a dozen different initials after their name. And quite honestly, for me, I have beyond my base, like library and information science degree, I do not have any other certifications. I've not needed any other certifications. There are no contracts that specifically require me to have certifications. I am supportive if people want to get certified, by all means. I have not found it to be necessary, though, at least in the professional certifications realm. There is a concept of business certifications, and by that I mean you can be certified women-owned business, you can be certified small business, veteran-owned business, etc. You can get certified at the state level, which we have been the entirety of my business existence. And we just recently got privately nationally certified and federally certified as both small business and women owned business. There's a whole webinar we could do as to why that is advantageous or why you might want to do that. The short story is, one, I'm interested in being identified and as part of our brand as women owned. And I am interested in the contracts that we do, because quite a bit are state and federal. You actually get preference with contract set asides if you are a small business or women owned business. So there's some advantages there in terms of landing work. Do you want a team? So, do you want it to be more than just you? Is there enough work? Are you comfortable with being financially responsible for more than just you? Can you afford the additional taxes? Because it's not just going to be their rate, there's going to be taxes associated. There's going to be an increase in the insurance requirements that you have. The more people you bring on, not just workers' compensation, but all the other insurance you have will increase. And you should be offering benefits as an ethical company, and there's costs to that. And can you afford appropriate salaries? If you are running a consulting business as a team of experts, you need to be priced as a team of experts. That is not just for you, that is for all of them. And so price accordingly, charge accordingly, and then pay your employees accordingly. Then, how much do you want to manage people versus how much do you want to stay operating as an expert consultant? I am currently navigating this space of it is me and I am running a business. I have 2 employees now that are under my wing. How much do I want to be managing people versus how much do I want to stay in the game, so to speak? I am much more interested in staying in the game than managing like a team of people. So for me, it becomes a consideration of now is a good balance, but if I bring anybody else on, I need to seriously consider bringing somebody on to manage everyone. So considerations once you get that large that you don't need to know the answer to right now, but that would be like the next future question for you. And when you're thinking about if you want a team, yes, there's the employee route and there's costs associated with that. If you're not quite ready for that commitment, you can get contractors. So working with contractors, whether directly in your business or using them as subcontractors, which can be a little trickier because they also have to be set up as a business, essentially. So there are some other not quite as like permanent commitments leading you up to employees as an option. So still consider all the things as to whether or not it makes sense to bring on more people. And then you do have some options as to what that actually looks like. And how much do you want to work? Is a question you should definitely ask yourself. Do you want to work just full time? Do you actually want to work less? Do you want to work part-time? You're running your own business. Like you can work as much or as little as you want to, which leads me to you can also work more than full time. While not intentional for myself for the most part, like I love what I do so much and we have so many great projects and clients. I am an overtime worker. It means that I am a little bit more tired, and I have to balance that work life stuff a little bit harder on my end. But it also means that I am bringing in more profits, right? Because just as if you don't work, you don't get paid, the more you work, the more you get paid, or the more money that you bring in this case. And I am gratified by the success of my business. And so that's a major motivator for me enjoying and being fine working more than 40 hours a week. Tools and resources. The tools that we use and that I recommend you consider as you get going. First, Google Workspace. We use Google Workspace for our emails, website domain, all the basic, like, get the business together, at least online. We use Dropbox for all of our client projects and work, for various reasons, but a good amount with the digital preservation piece in mind, digital versioning, etc. We use project management software, in this case ClickUp, and we actually have a whole webinar on how we use ClickUp that you can go check out later. As we brought on more employees and more projects, project management software became essential to tracking everything. Accounting, once we got a professional accountant for all the time, not just for our taxes, she got us set up with QuickBooks Online. So we use QuickBooks now for invoicing as well as tracking profit and loss, etc. There are so many reports now I can run with all that data. So once you get to that point, I definitely recommend. Virtual meeting space, Zoom. I was using Zoom pre-pandemic for some of my long distance clients, and that has, as you can imagine, increased significantly, where most of our work is conducted remotely, and we are usually the ones with the Zoom account unless it's like a big academic institution. So having an account will be important. Website, email campaigns, event registration. If you are doing anything that requires like webinar registration, if you're doing an email list, if you want to develop pipelines with products, then getting a resource, we use Kajabi in this case to help manage all of that data and provide that sort of platform and scaffolding has been really helpful for us. So that's what we run the entire webinar lifecycle through. Canva, we use it so often. Presentations, these webinars, some of the proposals we put together, all of our client presentations and work, we use Canva for. It's so much better than PowerPoint from a visual perspective. So can't recommend it enough. And then as you get employees, if it's more than just you, getting a payroll system, and in this case, retirement as a plan and benefit, we use OnPay, which also partners with Guideline for retirement. Resources. First and foremost, I recommend you get yourself a mental health therapist if you don't already have one. Having somebody to help shore up your mental health is so beneficial for your confidence, for your mindset, for you sussing out, like, was that a me issue or was that like a bizarre client like issue, that like that's a them issue. Helping to figure out boundaries, helping to interrogate your, like, the money stories we tell ourselves. All of that can be explored with a really good mental health therapist and is so important for you showing up and being your best for your business and making sound business decisions. Next, business coach. I would recommend getting a business coach sooner rather than later, because a business coach can actually help you figure out and set up all those foundational pieces. What entity do you want to be? Talk it out with your business coach. What services are you offering? How do you offer them? Figure it out with your business coach. What should your rate be? How should you advertise? Work with your business coach. I had a business coach for the first year going into my second year, and that's how I helped iron out all of that stuff. So sooner rather than later. I also recommend bringing in a lawyer early days, a lawyer for a solid contract, a lawyer to have on call essentially for any plagiarism or business tort issues that come up. It is amusing how much I speak to my lawyer, but it's so important for both your business security as well as you. Next up, tax accountant, especially if you are not super savvy on how much taxes you should or will be owing. Do not let it be a surprise. Work with a tax accountant, figure out how much you should be setting aside, what your quarterly estimate payment should be, etc. And then as we got going, and especially for moving into this fifth and sixth year at Relicura, branding and website design, like when I first started out, I made the website and it was actually pretty good. But having somebody work with me on the voice of Relicura, having someone help me with even the name of Relicura, the colors, the font, etc., having a professional work with me and lead me through the creative process for Relicura was, first of all, so enjoyable, but second of all, can be so important, especially if you are an expert in the field and you are one of the leading firms or becoming a leading firm. Having that professional branding, that professional website and copy can be immensely helpful. So, what it takes to make it. First of all, confidence. You probably picked that up. Second of all, subject matter expertise. You have to have expertise to base your services on. Third, experience. While you don't necessarily need to have a lot of experience, you should have at least a little bit as you get started. Otherwise, you sort of veer into contractor realm versus consultant. Next up, resiliency. It is going to be impossible to know the future in terms of what your business will look like, how it will grow. The more months and years you get under your belt, the more you can sort of feel out or estimate what like the next quarter might look like. But you can also have something like the pandemic happen in year 3 of your business, like it did for me. And what does that even mean for businesses in general when the pandemic hit, but also for us? So having the resiliency, both in terms of internal abilities as well as what your actual situation with your partner or your finances, etc. You absolutely will need to have a desire to learn about business, especially if you didn't take business classes, because who did in archives? Maybe some of you, but for the majority, I suspect not. So you have to be interested enough to learn about it because you will need to learn about it. You will also need to have the drive to figure things out because each of our businesses is so unique. While there are certain steps that each and every one of us should take, how you do it, when you do it, can depend on you, your situation, your business, etc. And so to some extent, you're going to have to figure it out on your own. And then the financial support. I am in a privileged position where I do have a partner. We do have some financial stability where we can withstand financial uncertainty at certain points. And so I was able to spend an entire year figuring out and building up my business to bring in income without us being dependent upon or impacted by whether or not I brought in income. Question: how long did it take to become reliably sustainable as a business? So first, I am not 100% that we have the same definition as sustainable, but hopefully this answer will help. Year 1, my goal was I just need to make more money than I spend, like make more money than the cost of setting up the business. Basically did not want to cost me or my partner money in that first year. And it went well. Year 1, I made money, not enough to be considered like what my full-time salary was at my last traditionally employed job, but it was a good amount. Year 2, my goal was to make the same amount as the salary of the job that I had left. And so in year 2, I was able to achieve that and like a little bit more. So that felt really good at year 2. Year 3, my goal was to make a profit, and that was achievable. It wasn't quite as much as I had hoped because that was pandemic hitting at that point. But then that's when I started doing the webinars, and that after 2020 and going into 2021, things just exploded. So year 4 and 5 was growth mode. I brought on a contractor first who then became my first employee. We then, within the year, got a second employee in addition to myself and my first staff member. So 4 and 5 were very much focused on growth, how to scale the business, how to scale services, what does it look like when I bring in more people, figuring out insurance and payroll and benefits, So this year, year 6, has very much been focused on stabilizing, refinement, and now that I have more than just me, hopefully making more profit. So having my employees not just be cost neutral, but hopefully bringing in additional money, which takes time, by the way. That could be a whole other webinar. So, depending on what you mean as sustainable, in my case, yes. But every situation is different. It depends on your financial needs, it depends on how much you're putting into the business, it depends on your business savvy, risk tolerance, etc. My particular journey is not typical. I believe the statistics are it usually takes businesses in general, I think it was 5 years to make it to profit mode. And I think even it takes, was it 2 or 3 years where businesses actually are usually in the red first before they're cost neutral. So it can take years. Like these are framed in terms of years for you to get to a point where you're not costing money, and then for you to get to a point where you're actually making profit, which is the point of business usually. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but hopefully it makes you think about more, what does that actually mean for you and what do you need it to mean? Question: did you ever experience the imposter syndrome? If yes, how did you overcome it? So as I mentioned just a little bit, the being an expert and putting myself out there, like I really enjoyed being viewed and still enjoy being viewed as an expert. It's an area that I am comfortable in. I am very confident in what I know. And based on experience and education, demonstrated success, etc. So I don't, at least in my mind, suffer from imposter syndrome, but I can be uncomfortable in situations where I do need to put myself out there just in general. Whether as an expert or as a business owner. So it's one of those where I think it depends on what is the experience that you're working within and offering, how much do you love it, how comfortable are you in it, and all of those things. For me, like the services we're doing, I'm so interested in. I like passionate about them, and I also have so much experience in. So it makes it easier for me to sort of stand in that experience and stand in my value and overcome that imposter syndrome, which can sneak up on you, which um, we also have an imposter syndrome webinar from a couple months ago that you can go check out. Resources: how much am I worth? There's a workbook as well as the different links that we have for where you could go and find a rate. Please visit the website, look at how we talk about the services we offer, check out the cool copy and branding that we got for Rollicura that I'm super excited about. And of course, we have so many more webinars over at youtube.com/Rollicura, so feel free to check those out. Thank you for attending. I think we have a couple minutes for questions. And so if we didn't already answer your question during the webinar, please feel free to use the chat box to type yours in, and we'll do the best we can to answer them all. Thank you.